Okay. Okay, Lindsey Hames testimony. Okay.
Okay, hi. It's been a really long time since I sat down and gave my testimony. Actually, I was saying to Lauren in the car, I'm like, I'm probably just going to sob through this because it's just really nice to look back and think about all that the Lord has done from the beginning. So, a little bit about me before Jesus. I was raised in a pretty traditional family. I'm the oldest and I have very strong oldest tendencies. um, and then Lauren is my sister, and then we have a younger brother named Michael. And so we had a great childhood. We had like the middle class American dream childhood. We had everything we asked for. We went on vacations, and my parents were great. And so that was what my childhood was like. We knew, we were taught about the Lord in some ways. Like, we would go to church for periods of time, but we never really got settled in anywhere. And I would say we would go to church on Sundays, but like, it wasn't, then nothing was continued at home after that. We didn't really, we would say our prayers, but that was about it. So I believed in God in that way. Like, I always believed in God. And then I hit my teenage years, really eighth grade. And for me, it really started out as just always wanting to have fun. It was like, what was fun? Well, drinking in a field was fun. Or, then it was smoking weed. And everything was just like about a party. And at that point, like, me and my dad really butt heads a lot. And I think, in a lot of ways, it was a shock to raise a teenage girl who was, pretty stubborn. And then me and Lauren were really, really close. So we're like 2.5-ish years apart. And so everything we did together. So very quickly it was like, well, if I was drinking, well, then she would drink with me. Or, I started smoking weed, so she could smoke weed with me. And so, like, we were just always super close. So anyway, it really just started off for like, it was fun. It was a party. But then really soon, that just, weight of the world, I feel like, when you don't know the Lord, when you don't really know what your worth is in. I think about, I'm a principal at it's a homeschool co-op, and I think about my students there a lot, and the influence that social media has on them, and telling them what their worth is. Because I know without that influence at that age, how much the world was dictating what I was worth in terms of boys' attention, or what I wore, how I acted, the things that I did. And I just kind of bought into like all of that you know so I fell into that whole trap of the world that always feels like it's so fun, until it's not. And by the time I would say, so it kind of was like the party life for a while. I drank a lot, like really heavily from a really young age. And then I guess I was about 16 the first time someone offered me a Percocet. It's like, sure, why not? I've done this, and this. Like, what's the difference? Well, that was it. Like, a switch was flipped, and I was exposed to opiates, and I was never the same after that, because I chased that high, from that point forward. And it's so funny because my best friend and I at the time were together there, and she took one too, but she threw up all night and she hated it. And I was like, this is the best thing I've ever experienced. And so it was literally as simple as that. It was as simple as like, sure, why not? I'm hooked. And so from that point forward, it was just always chasing that high, and opiates was it for me, one thing after another. And so I was really good at, school came pretty easy for me. So I was really good at kind of like keeping the outside looking pretty good, enough to fly under the radar, especially from my parents. During this period of spiraling out drug addiction, I graduated college with an English degree. And, you know, so everything looked good on the outside. I also had a sister who didn't really typically keep things looking really good on the outside. And so she was typically the focus of our parents because of a lot of the things that she would get herself into. And so the funny part about it is when she at 18 went to rehab, all of a sudden my parents were like, wait, something is not right with you. Like, what is happening here? All of a sudden, like the attention was kind of off of her. And so then there was like this realization that I was not so great. So fast forward, it just continues down this spiral to the point where my parents are like, all right, you need to do something. So I left my parents' house and I moved in with my grandma and I got clean for 30 days. And by clean, I mean no opiates for 30 days. I smoked weed, I was drinking, I was just feeling all of that, but I was clean because I wasn't using my drug of choice. So that's about how long I could always stay clean. Like, okay, I can do this. I want to start fresh. I'd have like 30 days and then I mean, it's same old, same old. Like I had nothing to fill that anymore, you know, like I'm still chasing the same high. Like our boy's gonna fill it for like a second and then that's boring. And then, you know, on to the next thing and on to the next thing. And so I moved in with my grandma, relapsed after 30 days. Her being at her house made me fly even more under the radar because she really wasn't, you know, super aware of what was going on. And so I spiraled out even worse than before. And I now have a drug addiction that I'm a waitress at this point and I work I make really good money there. I always closed. I worked a lot, but when I tell you that at the end of the night after buying what I needed to get high, I had money for a pack of cigarettes and $5 to put in my car for gas and do it all over again the next day. And so now I have an addiction I can't afford. And so, you know, when you're an addict, then you're like all the things you said you were never going to do, you start doing because you need to get high. And I was always telling myself I was going to get clean. Like, this is not the life I'm going to live, you know, like I'm going to stop. I'm going to use everything I have tonight. And tomorrow I'm going to get up and get clean. And like, it's such a lie because I just wanted to use more that night. And then the next morning I'm sick and now I need to go figure something out. So at that point, I started stealing from my grandma. And I like, that's so crazy because I was so close to her. And I can't even imagine that I would have gotten to that point of all people. But it started out as like, oh, I'll just find all the jewelry in the house and go, you know, I'll go get money from it, cash for gold, you know, everything I could cash in, I did. And that worked for a while. And then after that, it was like whatever cash I could find around the house. And that worked for a while. And then there's no cash around the house anymore. And there's no more gold around the house to sell anymore. And so then I started forging her checks. So I had convinced myself that, you know, I had this really good plan. I knew she had written me out a check for a certain amount of money. And so I was just like replicating that same check over and over again, the same exact amount of money. Like maybe this will just keep flying under the radar. And it did fly under the radar for like 4 times until, you know, I'm in the bank and I know I'm caught. The lady's on the phone. She's staring at me. I'm like, so I just bail. I leave and I go home. And she was obviously on the phone with my grandma. My grandma's like, wow, you know, the whole thing. And it was really like devastating for me because I had hurt her so much and I had to face the reality of like this is who I've become, you know, that I'm just, you know, chasing after this one thing so much that I'm willing to hurt. And all my relationships were hurting. My sister was clean at that time. She had come back from Florida. Clearly I was a hot mess. And we spent a lot of time together, but she knew where I was slipping into. My relationship with my parents were strained. So basically my grandma's like, I beg her, don't tell my parents. Okay. Until I'm now, because I didn't get the money that I wanted. So now I'm on a, you know, I'm just like on one. So I'm leaving the house. I'm driving everywhere. She's starting to freak out. Like, what's going to happen? So she does call my parents. So basically the next day I wake up, had that phone call from my dad, which is actually the calmest he's ever been because he usually would say like horrible things and like freak out at me. But I answered the phone. He was like, okay, are you done? And I was kind of like, yeah, like I'm tired, like I'm tired. And I will say, I would say probably a month prior to this, I started actually praying because I didn't want to live that life. And it was such a, you know, silly prayer, like, selfish prayer, I guess, at the time, but I didn't know the Lord. And I just would pray, please help me to wake up not sick and not want to use again. Like, just take this away from me. But I think back to that now, and, there's that song Living Hope, and it says, like, how great the chasm that lies between us. But it's like, talks about how the Lord just basically hears us in that darkness, right? And it was like, that was my prayer, like, oh, I just don't want to be sick so I can go on with my life, right? Like, just make me not sick and want to use. But the Lord heard my prayer. And when I think back to that little prayer that I was putting up, he heard me and he was like, yeah, but I have so much more for you. So much more than just not being sick anymore. So much more than not just wanting to get high. Like, I have abundant life for you. And that's what he was doing. And so this blow up in my face, I really needed, because what happened was I was faced with, I'm going to press charges on you or you can go away. And I didn't want to go to jail. Like, that was like basically, like, I didn't want to go to jail. I didn't want to deal with all of that. And I felt really bad for what I did to my grandma. Like, there was like a lot of guilt from that. So like, I wanted to do right by her. But what I wanted to do was, at that time, my parents had started going to Calvary Chapel Belmar, which is now Calvary Chapel South Jersey, where I go to church. And they had called, they had heard that Irma's son, Timmy, who is Becca's husband, had gone to Maine and gone through a program there. So my mom had talked to Irma and she said, yeah, Blessed Hope. Well, when this is presented to me, I'm like, hold up. Lauren got to go to Florida and go to this 30-day rehab where they could still smoke cigarettes, and it's co-ed, by the way. And I'm reading the rules for Blessed Hope. And I'm like, are you kidding me? First of all, at that point, it was 6 months. And I'm just reading all the rules. No smoking, no secular music. I couldn't even bring in music, no secular books. There's no boys there. Okay. And I'm like, this is unfair. Like, what the heck? But they really used what happened to their benefit to say, this is the option that you have, and this is the one that you got to take. All right, fine, I'll go. 6 months feels like a literal lifetime, but I will go and I'll just come back to my life. Like, that's how I'm going to go. I'm going to get clean. I did want to get clean. So like, let me go do this and, be right back, people. Like that, like, to my friends, like, I'll see you in 6 months, And so we went up there. Her and my dad drove me up, both chain smoked cigarettes the whole time. And, and they literally dropped me off in the driveway and turned around and left. And I was like, what the heck? They didn't even walk me in. After that, like, all these other people's parents walked them in. Like, they literally dropped me off at the edge of the driveway and was just like, we're going back to Jersey. See ya. And I was just like in culture shock, first of all, because, I did not go to Blessed Hope looking to get saved or even really looking to meet the Lord at all. I went to check off, the box. I did want to get clean. And so I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to do this. So there I am. And I will say, pretty early on, I mean, I had so many just fleshy, worldly habits. And, they all came forth in there. But for the most part, I was able to just be like, I'm here, I can do it. I am a firstborn, so I typically am a rule follower, for the most part. And so I'm like, all right, I can just do this. But pretty quickly, being under the word, like, my heart really did start to change. And I was pretty open to it in general, just like hearing and listening. I was not like rejecting the word or anything like that. But fast forward to, so I came in May. In July, so I'm only there a couple months. I'm just getting my like grounding, I'm just basically getting clear headed, basically. And I there's a phone call for me and it's my dad, and he's saying that my grandma's dying and that like she might not even make it the weekend, which was really hard for me because obviously part of me going there was like, I want to make up to her for what I did, you know? And so I remember Peg calling me. At that point, Peg lived at Blessed Hope. She was not married yet. So she lived there. She had a room there. She was the house mom. And she called me into her room and she was like, we're going to let you go. She's like, but you got to really, make this decision and decide what you're going to do. And so, like, here, 2 months into this, and I'm like, I'm on a bus going back to New Jersey. And so that was like really the turning point for me because I could have gone and gotten high. I could have drank, I could have all the things, but there was something in me that was like, I don't want to live that life anymore. Like I do want to be different. And I went there and I got there and my grandma passed away. And I stayed for her funeral. And I think I stayed for like almost a week because of her funeral. And it was really, really hard. But I went back. And that was like a huge change that happened when I went back. I was like just seeing things in a completely different light. Like, okay, I made this choice. I stood. I could have ran and dipped out, but something in me, and at that point, I don't even know what it was because I wasn't really like, I'm sold out at this point. Like I wasn't. It was really new to the beginning, but there was something that I had just been hearing in the word that just made me want to keep going. And I was thinking about that today, and I was thinking about the story of Rahab and how, when the spies go in to get her to hide them, the biggest thing for me that always stands out to that is that she did not know. She did not know the Lord, right? She didn't know him. It wasn't like she had, experienced all this stuff that the Israelites had. She was on the other side of it. But what she said to them is that while they're talking to her, she said, I know that the Lord has given you the land, that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were on the other side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. As soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted. Neither did there remain any more courage in anyone because of you. For the Lord, your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Now, therefore, I beg you, swear to me by the Lord, since I have shown you kindness, that you will also show kindness to my father's house and give me a true token and spare my father, my mother, my brothers, my sisters, and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death. Okay, so I'm at this point where, no, like I haven't experienced this, right? I know that God gave me the grace to get through being in Jersey, but I don't even really know what that is yet at that point. What I did know is what Peg had said about what God had done in her life. I had heard about Emily's life and her story and what God had done in her life. And so there wasn't this, I wasn't, I hadn't necessarily experienced it for myself in that way, but I had heard enough that I was like, okay, like I want to at least see, what this looks like and just take this opportunity and see what the Lord could do in my life because I had heard from them. And then when you think about Rahab's story and the fact that she does do this and they are faithful and they do get her family out, and she is known here as Rahab the prostitute, but then she becomes a Rahab in the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the mother of Boaz. And that's what, just from simply her hearing what God had done and being willing to step out, walk into the camp of a God she didn't know herself because she had heard what he was doing and how he radically transformed her life. And that's what he did in my life. I heard what he was doing. I heard what he was doing in people's lives, and I was willing to just sit and allow him to reveal himself to me and to reveal his plan for me. And then he radically transformed my life. But there was a stepping out into the unknown because I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know what following the Lord looked like besides watching the people, over me. But this was completely new to me. And so that's what I did. Okay, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to just be willing to hear what he has to say. And I'm going to be willing to just sit under the word and listen. And when I came back, there was just this different, heart to want to know him more and just like put in the effort. Like, what's like, I'm going to be here for 6 months. Like, I might as well see what he has to offer. Well, there's always the option. I can always go back to my life. Like, that's still there waiting. But all these other people's lives, he rescued them, he saved them, they're set free. They're choosing to be here in a house of all women and lead them. Like, God has obviously done miraculous things in their lives. And we would hear the testimonies of the other women. So I came back, and that's what I did. At night, I would read the Gospel of John. That's where I really started at that point, because I just was, someone had said that you want to know the Lord more, like read the Gospel of John. And that's what I did. Every night I would lay in bed and I would read the Gospel of John, and I just grew to know him more and more. And then I remember that I would pray every night, the verse. I would just say, Lord, please help me to pick up my cross and follow you. And because none of that came naturally to me. This wasn't like I had this desire to let go of all these things, or to even willing to like be changed necessarily, but I did have this desire to follow him and to see what he would do with my life. And so I would pray that every night, like, help me to do it. No, my flesh was loud. No, I didn't want to submit to everything. No, I didn't want to do everything that everyone was telling me. Yeah, my flesh was loud. And honestly, to be completely honest with you, I really mourned opiates. This sounds weird, but I would actually cry by the thought that I would never use again, because that was what I knew as this like feel good feeling, right? And so there was this period where I had to come to terms with that. Like, if I'm doing this, I'm doing this, right? And that means I can't use anymore. Cause like, even going, I was like, well, I could be like a recreational user, right? Like, I could use opiates once a week and everything will be fine. I had to come to terms with that. And I actually like mourned over this. Like, I remember crying. And like, when I think back to that now and how the Lord has really set me free from that, and that's so far from even the thought on my mind, because of all that the Lord has blessed me on with, and just how much of an abundant life he's given me. I think back, like, that's so crazy, but that's really where I was. So anyway, yes, I chose that I wanted to follow the Lord, and I made that decision. And I think that that's really important, because I think that it can be easy for us to just say, well, I'm going to just wait and see with each thing he asked me to do if I want to do it. But when we get ourselves caught up in that, we leave so much room for the flesh for us to choose the flesh. And I had to come to a decision where I just said, Lord, I want to follow you, and I'm going to do it. Whatever you ask me to do, I'm going to do it. And I say all this now, like, it was easy, because when I look back, I'm like, okay, like, I knew all the work that the Lord was doing in my life. And I look back with so much fondness on my time in the program and in school and ministry. But I had a lot of correction, like, because I had so many things. I was constantly corrected on drawing attention to myself around boys. That was probably the number one thing. Pictures I posted on Facebook. I look at Peg because she was always sitting me down, like, no kissy faces on Facebook, not drawing attention to yourself around the boys, just like things, like just behaviors that I had. And at that point, moved into school of ministry. And I will say that was like life-changing for me, because when you're leading other girls and you're in leadership, there's this different level of accountability. And I really needed to be called out on a lot of the behaviors. Like, I needed it. And there was such a refining in that time of school of ministry that was just took it such another level from the program for me. And I grew so much there under a very watchful eye, who was always telling me and walking me through, like, why I needed to change a lot of the behaviors that I had. And it was hard. Like, there was times where I would cry and I would feel like all I was doing was getting corrected all the time. And I was like, and I remember crying out to the Lord and being like, Lord, why do you just like, don't like anything about me? You just want to change everything about me. Like, I said that to the Lord, and he spoke so clearly to me one time, and he said, I know who you really are. I'm actually showing you who I've created you to be. And I was like, I needed that, because that's what I felt like. I was like, you hate my personality. You hate all my habits that I have. You're just trying to change everything about me. He's like, no, but I made you, and I know who I've made you to be. So I did school of ministry. And I loved being there. I loved the house. I could never leave. Like, and Pei got married at that time. And so she ended up moving out around the time that I was in school of ministry. And so I was there, and for a while was the only school of ministry. And then after I graduated school of ministry, I got a job at Blessed Hope, and I became the third phase advisor. So I lived in the other house with the girls who had jobs, and I, you know, mom them. I took them to work. I picked them up from work. I did their, their budgeting with them and all of those things, and kind of walk through that next phase with them, where they're walking and they're in the world and just kind of doing life with them. And I loved it. I was serving in youth group at the church. So 2010, I graduated school of ministry at the end of 2011. And then I was also, besides third phase advisor, I was working at the Christian school there and doing youth group. And I met my husband. That's a really long story, but it's a funny story, but I met my husband. I met him as a friend, and I knew that he was in school. He went through Teen Challenge for 14 months and then came and did school of ministry there. And he had been interested in me, and I had no idea because he didn't tell anyone. And I guess before I get into that, I should tell you that there was lots of other boys before him that I was convinced that I was meant to marry. I always had them staked out, like, he's clearly my husband. That's meant to be. I had all the reasons all the time, and praise the Lord that he knows better than me, and that I did not end up with any of those boys that I thought that should be my husband. Like, Lord, that one obviously should be my husband. He's got tattoos. He wears that. Yeah. All the, the same ways I chose men before, clearly, Lindsey, you don't know what you're doing. And so my husband is so far from that. Okay. I was used to like Jersey boys, and he's from Arkansas. He's a Southern boy, complete opposite, which is probably why he wasn't on my radar at all. Like, and he really did just lovingly, genuinely pursue me in such a way that I had never experienced before. I had such bad experiences with men, and he was not like that at all. And so once we started talking, we started kind of like dating in like February, and he asked me to marry him at the end of April. So like it went, and we were married by November. So it was pretty quick process. Like, when that's kind of what we say, but it was also a really hard process for me. I had experienced so much freedom in the Lord, but when we started talking and dating, like, all of these feelings came back up from the past, and I felt so much shame. And actually, so many people talk about like how their first year of marriage is really hard. Like, no, that did not happen to us at all. Our courting was so hard, and it was mostly because of me. I was being pummeled by the enemy. You're dirty. You're this, you're that. You're going to destroy him. Like, you've ruined every other person you've ever dated, and just felt so gross. And it was like so crazy because, it was just like I had to get to that phase for the Lord to really deal with these things in my heart. Cause like, I was like, I felt like great. And then now these feelings are coming up again, and now the enemy is just trying to take me out. And I was like a crazy person. Like, I would be like, I can't see you. I need to fast for a week. And is that my phone being loud? I need to fast for a week, and like over and over again, even though the Lord had told me multiple times, yes, this is the man that you're supposed to be with. Like, I needed to know that I know that I know. And I would be like, sorry, we can't talk again. Like, I need to just talk to the Lord another week, over and over again. I did this through the whole time. At one point, Peg was like, Lindsey, go hang out with him. Like, no, I'm just going to stay here in the house. Like, I feel really safe here. I feel really safe and comfortable here. And I can just like ignore all these feelings. But it was really hard. And he was like super patient with me. But it's crazy how those things, you don't even realize when you're in it, like how deeply they affect you, the decisions that you make that don't seem like a big deal. And it was just like, you know, me, like, the choices that I made really left scars that I didn't even realize until that came up. But I recognize now that, like, of course, the enemy's goal was to keep us not together. And it was crazy because we did it, we got married. And it's like, as soon as we said, I do, this like weight lifted off of me. And I felt so much better. And so it was like stopping us from getting to that point. So, so yeah, so then we're married and now I'm not living, now I have to move out of the women's house, which was really, really hard for me as well, because I really didn't want to leave that house. I loved it there. I love Blessed Hope. I love being with the girls. I got to stay third phase advisor. So I mean, that's where I worked, but I didn't sleep there and live there with the girls anymore. And so, seasons changing and just, at that point, Peg moves. So she moves here. Actually, Emily becomes the director and I actually became the assistant director with Emily. So I wasn't third phase advisor anymore. And, it was hard for me having her leave also because we were so close. Like during this time of me actually living in the house, they redid the house before I got married and I lived with her in Mike for 6 months. Right after they got married. I'm not even kidding. I mean, like pretty soon after. Actually, when I first moved in with you guys, you were still living at Deb Murray's. It was before, like, that's how early it was. I know. Like, she's crazy. She moved me into her house. And so I lived with them. Like, I was really close with them. And so when she left, like, it was really, really hard for me because I was like, okay, like, my person. She's like, like my spiritual mom. And it was really like a weird transition. And it's just a weird transition anyway, than the program without Peg there, And so, but I was there for probably, what year did you move? 14. Okay. So in 2015, I had my son Maverick. And then the Lord started to call, because I said I was never moving back to New Jersey. And I was never going to go. And but my husband was feeling a pull to go to New Jersey, which that's really weird, obviously, because he's from Arkansas. He's like really not Jersey at all. And but he wanted to go back to school. My parents were like, you come, we can help you. Like he can go back to school, all of that. So like the Lord started to really change my heart. And I told him, okay, you want to go, we'll go. But my heart was really not there. And I remember the Lord saying to me, in Isaiah, set your heart towards the highway. So like the Lord was really clear that we needed to go. But this was another hard transition. And I was leaving a place like you guys have here that's filled with community, right? Like it's here. You have your people. You have people to speak into your life. There's Bible studies every night. And I went back to, which I love my church that I'm at, but it doesn't have a discipleship program. It doesn't have that same community that I came from. And I really struggled, like honestly, that first year that we were back in New Jersey, I literally questioned my salvation like multiple times. Like, am I even saved? And I remember calling Peg and like crying. And she said very clearly to me, your worth is not in service. Your worth is in the Lord. But I was so used to being in ministry, I was in ministry full time. I was in it and I just didn't know it like stopped and I did not know what to do with myself. And she reminded me of that. And so that whole year ended up being like a back to the basics with the Lord. I was just like in my word, crying out to him, praying. And he was just like this new, refreshing, pouring out of his spirit, kind of similar to when like I first got saved. And many of you are probably experiencing that where like the word is so new and fresh and God is speaking so clearly to you and you're just like hearing it. and almost everything in the word you want to highlight. It's like, okay, I hear you so clearly, and God is speaking so clearly to you. He told me not to leave Maine and said, don't go back to New Jersey. And I, in the beginning, and I knew what he was saying. He was just telling me all these things to do. And it was like, I did get back to that with him in that year of New Jersey, just kind of stripped away from everything that I knew. And I think that was really important for me because, I loved ministry. I loved the women's program, but, I guess I even just got into the easiness that was for me to work there. And it got me just back to those basics with the Lord. So I really, really needed that. And so another thing that we didn't know when we were coming back is that the church that we are at now was starting a homeschool hybrid. And so it's its own thing. It sounds crazy, but we're homeschoolers and we have classes some days and all of that. And so that was starting when I came back. So I ended up being able to, it was like it started 2017. So we came back at the end of 2015, September of 2017, they needed teachers. And I got hired to be the middle school teacher there. A whole different world from women's discipleship, ministering to, drug addicts like myself that I was used to. And I love doing that. So now I have middle schoolers. And so, but, the Lord really gave me a heart for them to be able to, and you guys probably know that Hallie was one of my middle schoolers. So I know her from back then. She was actually one of my students. In the early years of GCA, and, just having the opportunity to pour into them at an age where I really went off the deep end, because that's really where I went, really started to slip into all of that. And so just ministering to them. So I watched the Lord show up there and just provide this place for me. Again, different. I miss discipleship, and I would say that to the Lord, but I look back now, when I think about my life now, now I'm the director of that program, and I have another son, Remington, and the fact that I get to be in ministry and be with my kids is like the biggest blessing to my life. So they're there with me 3 days a week, and on the other 2 days I homeschool them. We go to school together, we come home together, and like, I know the Lord knew me that well that he's like, okay, you think you want this, but let me show you what I have for you. What I have for you is exactly what you need. And it is. And I am so blessed to be able to do that and to be with my babies. And so I just think so much about the fact that we can sell ourselves short with the Lord by not choosing to just go all in with him and surrender our hearts to him. And so when I was thinking about that today, I was thinking about the Israelites. A lot of times I'm thinking about the Israelites and them, but I was thinking back to, when Moses sends out the scouts I'm going to summarize so much right now because there's a lot of things, but to go scout out the land, the promised land, right? And you have Joshua and Caleb who go, and the other ones, and Joshua and Caleb come back and they're like, yeah, I mean, there's giants there, but let's go. Like, this is the land the Lord has given us. Like, let's go for it. And then you have the other guys that are like, no way. Like, we're not going in there. This is hard. There's giants. Are you kidding me? Like, well, you took us out of Egypt for this, all the complaints, all the things. And it's really easy for us to go back and like look back at our lives and be like, that wasn't so bad. It wasn't so bad. Like, this is hard. I don't know what lies ahead for me here, or this is uncomfortable, or this is like really stretching me, or this is beyond what I imagined it would be. And it's really easy for us to glamorize that life we had before, where it felt easier, where I could just feed my flesh, where, I didn't have to be accountable to someone, or I didn't have to crucify the flesh, right? And so they're like, no, this is the promised land. This is the journey they took to go into the land that God had prepared for them. And they were like, no way. And they messed with all the other people. And they stirred up the other people to say, no, we don't want to. And later on, when Moses was talking to the Lord said, it's because they don't wholly trust me. He was like, it's not the land. It's not, It's not, they don't wholly trust me. But the difference between Joshua and Caleb was that they did. And so they had seen what God had did, and they had held on to those promises, and they had remembered the things that he has done. And so that's what I do. I write down the things that the Lord has done. I remind myself, because, and then it's so hard. It's like, how can I not just be grateful and just follow you, Lord, because you've done so much for me. You've saved me. I mean, you rescued me. You heard me in my bed, in my sin, and you rescued me out of it. And then fast forward 40 years, when it's time to go into land, now they didn't get to, they got to circle back around, and all those people didn't get to go into it. Well, now it's time to go into it. And you've got this group of people that are like, we're just going to stay here. We don't need to cross over. This grass here looks pretty good for our flock, so we're just going to stay here. And, you know, Moses kind of works through some things with them that they have to go in and fight with the rest of the Israelites, but that they can stay there. But it always makes me think about that part of like, it's so often for me to just stay where it's comfortable instead of just walking into the promise that the Lord has for me, fully just submitting, even though it's hard. That was why they were scared before. There were giants, but it was the land flowing with milk and honey. It was the promised land that God had promised Abraham. And so the Lord has something for each one of us. And it doesn't mean the journey there is going to be easy. I've told you all these high points, but there's been really hard points too. And it hasn't all been easy. But I did make that decision early on when I was like Rahab, not knowing for myself, but just really experiencing and hearing from other people, to step out into the camp of the God that I didn't know and watch him show up. And then I had the blessing then to become like Caleb and Joshua, who saw the things. Their sandals didn't wear out. Manna was given to them from heaven. The Israelites got to see God part the Red Sea. I've watched him do that in my life, even through the hard things. And we've had probably one of the hardest years in our marriage over this past year. We've had multiple miscarriages, just even though we've known that we've always wanted to have, a big family, and it's been heartbreaking and it's been hard to walk through. And I remember laying in bed after the first one and just the Lord really speaking to my heart. And it was just like hearing him. And I just remember verbally saying, Lord, where else would I go? You have the words to eternal life. There's been so much that he's done over these years that even in those darkest places, there's nowhere else for me to turn. There's no other answer. He will see me through. He has shown up time and time again. He will do it again. I will trust him. I will wholly trust him, even in those times where it doesn't make sense. And I can't understand why that would be the answer, And so, but that's what happens as you walk with him. You have to take that step into the unknown for a minute and give him that chance, and then watch him show up time and time again and reveal to you that he does have abundant life for you. And it's better than anything that you could ask or think, even when it gets hard, because he will show up and he will be there for you like no one else. And he will give you promise after promise after promise. She mentioned Lauren, and during that time period, it was 8 years of me praying for her from the time that I got saved in 2010. There was a time period where she came to Blessed Hope for a minute, but honestly, she didn't really want to. I was very pregnant and screaming at her to get in the car, and not in a nice way at all. I was like, you better get in the car right now. You're going to Maine. And she just did, because she wanted me to just like go into labor. I was like almost ready to have and so I packed her stuff and I put her in the car, and she went, and she stayed for a little bit, and then I went to teen camp and she left while I was away. And I was just like, Lord, no, God, this was when it was going to happen. Like, what are you doing? We had her here, God. Like, why? And now I look back at all that she had to walk through that to get to the point where all that time later, she said, I'm ready to go. Like, I'm going to do this. But the Lord had given me a promise for her that 8 years before. And he said that He did not waver at the promise of God through unbelief, but was strengthened in faith, giving glory to God and being fully convinced that what he had promised, he was also able to perform. And therefore, it was accounted to him for righteousness. And so I held on to that promise for 8 years for her. And so when I look back and I'm just like, I mean, how could I not be just grateful for what the Lord has done? I know so many of my friends today still live in that life that I would have been living if I just went and got clean and came home, or was, still living the life. I mean, I would at this point probably not be alive, but I'm just so thankful that the Lord pulled me out of that. And so when I think about that and I think about how easy and how many women I went through the program with, how many women either said, no, I'm not willing to do this. I'm not willing to, lay down my wants and my needs, which are all really so silly. All these wants and needs that I thought I wanted and have, the Lord has fulfilled in so much better ways than what I had planned out for myself. But all these women that said, no, I'm not willing to do that, or I'm not crossing over, like this is good right here, instead of truly entering in and being willing to obediently follow the Lord, even when it's hard, and watch him show up and do things that are just beyond what we can ever ask or think. And then in Hebrews 11, it says, by faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. By faith, he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who was invisible. And I just always think about that, because it is easy, to just continue on and to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, but it's not worth it. And it's so much more worth it to follow the Lord. And there may be things that he's asking you to lay down. There was many things that he told me to lay down that I thought I couldn't do it. What we walked through this past year, I would have said to you, I could never go through that. I could never walk through that. I could never experience loss like that. But I did it with the Lord. He saw me through it. He saw me through my heartbreak. He showed up. He loved me. He reminded me over and over again that he has good and perfect promises for us, and we will hold on to that. And so it's worth it to step out and just let him do the work that he wants to do in your life. So I could say a lot more, but we'll just stop there.
Just stop it.